In January, news emerged about the first potential burial site in Ontario of Indigenous people near a former residential school. And it's anticipated that many other such sites could exist. With us from Thunder Bay on how investigations into these places are carried out, Charnel Anderson, who covers the Northwest for Ontario Hubs. Hello, Charnel.
Hey, Jan.
All right, so tell us about the St. Mary's potential discovery.
So last month, on January 17th, actually, Wajisco First Nation became the first community in Ontario to announce that they found 171 anomalies or plausible burials within cemetery grounds associated with St. Mary's Residential School. And so Wajisco is also known as Rat Portage. It's an Anishinaabe community just south of Kenora. And they had a residential school there that went by a handful of different names, the latest being St. Mary's. And the school was operated by the Roman Catholic Church from 1897 to 1972. And according to the TRC, at least 36 kids died while going to school there. Their investigation, which started in May of last year, was led by the First Nation and two residential school survivor groups. Together, they developed various protocols and principles rooted in Anishinaabe culture to guide their investigation. And, like other communities, they used archival evidence, survivor testimony, and archaeological assessments to identify which sites to look at. And so using that system, along with ground penetrating radar, is how they identified these 171 plausible grave sites.
All right, so we have a couple of photos. Tell us what we are looking at here.
Yeah, so this is a black and white image of the back of St. Mary's, which, as you can see, sat not far from the shoreline that I believe is Lake of the Woods there. And so that was built in 1897. It's a brick building with 2 or 3 floors. There's a series of dormers along the roof. And I understand actually that site is not far from the Devil's Gap Marina. And in that part of Lake of the Woods, there's a bay called St. Mary's Bay.
All right, and another photo here.
And so, yeah, this is another black and white image. That would be the front of the building that we just saw. The date says 1929, and there looks to be, 100 or more students, boys and girls, all lined up in front of the school. They're on the deck there, down the stairs, and in front of the school. And actually, the school operated for 75 years. And during that time, more than 6,000 kids from 33 different communities went or were taken there.
So Charnel, since 2021, when the unmarked graves were discovered in Kamloops, British Columbia, approximately how many sites have been looked at now?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, since the announcement out of Kamloops, there's really been this reckoning, not just in Canada, but internationally, of the treatment and deaths of Indigenous children who attended, these church-run, state-sponsored residential schools. And, after Kamloops and Cowessess, these announcements that really resonated with the public, the federal and some provincial governments announced funding to help communities investigate potential grave sites. And I don't have a precise number, but there's been dozens of investigations into potential unmarked graves across much of the country. They're all in different phases. Some communities have announced their findings, others have not. But that's sort of the thing with this. It's really an individualized process, and every investigation is unique.
Now, as you mentioned, there was national and global coverage and reaction to Kamloops, but I don't think a lot of people know this, that some discoveries of unmarked graves were were discovered as long as 1974. Take us through a bit of the history of unmarked graves in this country.
Yeah, I think, this is something that sort of gets lost in the discussion of unmarked graves near residential schools. Kamloops got a lot of attention, but it was not the first site where potential unmarked graves were found or, actual graves were found. So for example, just 2 years earlier in 2019, near Muskowhegan Indian Residential School in Saskatchewan, a team of researchers identified 10 to 15 potential burial sites. And as you say, this is the earliest investigation that I'm aware of in 1974 near Battleford Industrial School, also in Saskatchewan. There, a group of anthropology students found, excavated, and restored over 70 grave sites that were in an unregistered cemetery. And there's been accidental discoveries too, like at Dunbow Industrial School in Alberta, where in 1996 there was a big flood that caused the river to swell, eroding the shoreline and exposing caskets and remains of the students who died and were buried there. For a long time, survivors have said that there's children buried near these schools. It's really only just recently, that we started listening.
In terms of the investigations, how are Indigenous-led and survivor-driven investigations different?
So, some of the older gravesite discoveries happened by accident, whether that was flooding or construction in these areas. And when that happens, you really don't have a lot of time to decide what to do. But now, communities are able to get together with survivors and other affected communities and decide collectively kind of what is the best way to undertake these investigations. They can have conversations about what to do if or when they do find grave sites, whether they want to leave the children where they're resting, or to take them home. They can decide the best way to memorialize them, and they can take their time to do that, because it's not something that you want to rush if you can help it.
So Charnel, talk to me a little bit about the challenges that come with these investigations.
So, I mean, there's, a number of practical challenges with these investigations. I spoke with Kimberly Murray, who's the independent special interlocutor for missing children and unmarked graves. And she's been meeting with Indigenous communities across the country. And she says a lot of these communities are facing similar challenges, when it comes to things like doing funding proposals or working with municipalities and private landowners. And then there's also the issue of accessing records. She says that the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation and Library and Archives Canada has been slow to release records. Those are just really some of the practical challenges. There's also emotional and spiritual and cultural aspects as well to this, which, communities will have to find their way through as well.
Now, very quickly, what's next in the process?
Yeah. So, I mean, for St. Mary's, they're continuing their search on other sites they've identified. They're seeking permission from landowners, private landowners, to search their properties. The chief said they're looking at getting cadaver dogs to help the community. But, elsewhere, there's over 24 active burial sites in Ontario. And I can't speak to, where they're at exactly, but I imagine those communities will make announcements if and when they're ready to.
Charnel Anderson, thank you so much for joining us on the program. Very important stuff. Really appreciate it.
Thanks. Thanks, Jan.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.